first encounter with Carol and Arjun was around 98, when they first came to a conference at the UDR I did on public space. And I'll never forget how Carol was very excited. She couldn't believe that there was so much interest. There were 300-400 people in the room. There was such incredible discussion. And that was a conference where the Parel Millland as an issue first surfaced, that, you know, the city should be looking at it, etc. So she was part of all those discussions, and I know I could sense something was brewing in her mind, and she kept telling me in our subsequent meetings that she was very impressed by the fact that there was such a void and a need for public discourse around the imagination of the city. And it was around in 2000 that I heard from Arjun saying that he had this idea to do PUKAR, and would I be a founding member with him on it, with Sheila and others. And of course I was extremely excited. What I understood in my conversations with Arjun, which I think was significant, was that there were a number of us in the city who were architects essentially, worrying about the physical form of the city. But there was truly a void in the discourse through the lens of social sciences about the city. Mumbai has a very rich, or had a very rich intellectual history through the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, where social scientists were very much part of the debate. I mean, this was the hotbed for intellectual kind of discourse. And then there was a void of some kind. And what I found exciting about the imagination of PUKAR and Carol and Arjun's involvement with that voice would come back into the debate. And that's exactly what I believe has been PUKAR's contribution in its initial years. I think at some point there was a shift. For them also realizing that how does one affect action on the ground, because it is the mandate of PUKAR is not only the creation of knowledge and research but also action, and I think the project that PUKAR now is involved with is truly one of significance, because it does two things. It not only addresses the question of capacity building to engage with issues in the city, but it builds that capacity at the grassroots, which means that it not only by default therefore encompasses many more geographies, or a wider geography of terrain in the city, and is not restricted to, you know, South Bombay or maybe the elite quarters in the city, but it actually has it growing out of the grassroots. These are people who are, you know, ordinary citizens who have never been empowered through this process of research, and being able to have the forum to articulate the imagination of the city. And I think the effects of this you have to be patient for. These are not things that in a year or two you realize their fruits. These take many years, sometimes a whole generation, because the children of these youth fellows will be different people. They will be different kinds of citizens. So it's, of course, you know, it's also about the construction of citizenship, and it goes into all those complex debates. But I think this combination of building capacity and building capacity at the grassroots is a very powerful, potent, and extremely important contribution that PUKAR is making. I think in the initial years, PUKAR faced many challenges, which largely had to do with questions of funding and infrastructure. And I think this was a question that I know Arjun and Carol both, and we all struggled with, is how much of its identity should be place-based, or should be based on its physical infrastructure. And so, you know, this quest and aspiration to get space and an office and do this, should we have our own space where events are done, or should we be parasitic in the way we, you know, synergistically align with other people? I mean, I think those were one set of questions. And then the other set of questions was, at what point does and how does one actually engage people in the process of research, and how does then at what point one begin to make that translate into action on the ground? And so the first generation, I think before even Anita was back and on the scene, was Carol and Arjun creating a cohort of young associates around them in a way that could they influence some young people from different disciplines that might have a kind of resonance, or they might have a ripple effect. And I think with the expansion through Anita's efforts of the youth fellowship and creating this very wide grassroots base, I think the true mission of PUKAR, I really believe that will be much better achieved. You know, I mean, of course, this is a big question. How has PUKAR contributed to the culture of the city? And I think it has, because it has made I think it has made visible in very sophisticated ways the potential of the grassroots in engaging with the city, methods in which they could do that, but also bringing attention just through projects like Kola Bandar and others to parts and of the city that otherwise people don't know how to pick up in their imagination and how to act. And I think many NGOs don't know how to act in these gray zones in the city, which are not the jurisdiction of the municipal corporation, they're not the jurisdiction of the state government, there's part of the central government through Bombay Port Trust, but that's a detached equation. And so therefore, how does one even engage with these places? And I think those are all the contributions that are debate changers in a sense, because they shift the debate, and I think if they inspire a generation to do work in those areas, terrains, and directions, it's a massive contribution.
So I think I suspect that Arjun Appadurai asked me to join the board of trustees of PUKAR because I can only guess this. He must have felt that my background as a survey researcher, and a fair amount of that did involve social research, although within the framework of a commercial organization. He must have thought that this experience as a survey researcher may be of some relevance to the board of PUKAR. I can't imagine any other reason for him to ask me to become a trustee. What's unique about PUKAR? Well, I would say that the intensity of engagement that I have seen young people have with this organization, with PUKAR, is absolutely extraordinary and quite unique. I'm involved with some other NGOs that also have youth programs and that try and reach out to the youth. But the sort of youthful buzz that I've seen at PUKAR is exceptional. The attendance and the enthusiasm of young people at PUKAR events is something I've never seen anywhere else. So I'd say that's the most unique thing that I find about PUKAR. How PUKAR does it, I think you've got to ask Anita, but it is truly extraordinary. Has PUKAR contributed to the city? Of course it has. It has initiated, it has incubated. I'm not sure it has archived much, but it certainly has initiated and incubated the creation of new knowledge and not just knowledge but insights about the city that I think no other organization was doing and needed to be done. I think government organizations, I think the business community, all of them can use this knowledge that PUKAR has created for the benefit of Mumbai's inhabitants. And God knows Mumbai's citizens need to be benefited given the conditions that they live under.
PUKAR represents a very interesting possibility of transcending the silos within which development occurs in Bombay. Not only in this city but in development in general, people network with people working in similar sectors. So somebody like me works on slum dwellers, housing, evictions. I don't meet people who are related to cinema or related to health or related to culture or heritage. And part of the big idea of PUKAR was to explore partnerships that weren't happening. So being part of that experiment and exploration was what was interesting, because although at one's work one is focused, because you can't be everywhere, your mind wants to explore other options. So for me that was very special about PUKAR. First of all, PUKAR faced several challenges, and as a trustee they came upon each one of us to address. The first was that it was such a different concept. It required people who didn't have much to do with each other to come together as trustees. It sought to get people who had nothing much to do with each other in forms of construction that were different. So PUKAR had associates, PUKAR had resource people. It had all these formations that were not conventionally part of how you run an organization. And PUKAR wasn't providing any service delivery. So when you have an NGO coming up, they say, "Ab kya karoge?" And research always seems esoteric. And giving young people an opportunity to explore something that they wanted to do, which was not in a prescribed research format, were all new things. So how do you explain this to other people? How do you present it to somebody to give you money to? How to concretize it into an accountability mechanism? These are all new things, and luckily they produced more humor than angst. Since its inception, PUKAR has changed a lot in what it does, how it does, what its focus is, and who it involves to do what. So in the initial phase, as I explained to you, it was an attempt to give young people who aspire to be researchers to explore something they were passionate about, and they produced interesting and valuable information that was enriching in and of itself, and all of them have gone around to do very concrete and important functions, and some of them are still associated with PUKAR. But somewhere down the line, PUKAR developed a, I think almost unplanned, but I know that it was important for Arjun as a founder to consider that, a commitment to looking at the aspirations of young people. And within that, to look at the possibility of providing young people to look at their own neighborhoods from a framework of inquiry. And I think PUKAR calls it the youth fellowship. So somehow for me, the youth fellowship doesn't really embrace the special content of what this program actually does. But in its own very special and unusual way, it has made young people reformulate the way in which they look at their neighborhoods, and to look at each other's work, because a part of it is not just to leave them on their own isolation to see it, but to look at what the others who are looking at their neighborhoods bring to the table. And collectively, they are beginning to produce an imagery of the city that is very unusual, which is almost under the viewer, the viewing table of how the elite look at the city from the South Bombay perspective, and to bring to the notice of more and more people who are addressing governance and delivery systems, to start taking these young people's view into consideration. It's going to be a long journey, but I think that's a very unique and special contribution. And it's a very tough thing to present, I know, to people, But if it survives, it can become a very critical aspect of mainstreaming what young people can do for the city. Most of the organizations that are set up with a vision find that they're often ahead of their times. And certainly the potential of involving young people, young men and young women, young girls and young boys, envisioning their city is really something which is ahead of its time, because although we keep talking about the demographic dividend, we talk about urbanization and the volumes of youth living in cities, we haven't embraced the implications of those as people who are opinion makers in the city or people who deeply care about the city. And so, as a trustee of PUKAR, I'm concerned with this paradox that you're doing cutting edge stuff, you are bringing into the mainstream voices and age groups that require to take the mantle of leadership in the future and whose lives have to move in a way different from the way the rest of us think. But will we survive till then? Because right now, the legitimacy of this work has yet not been acknowledged. And organizations require grant makers to believe in these visions. So unless that coincides with this process, like many other institutional arrangements in the NGO sector, things which are not project delivery, which are not giving one soap, one injection, one this, one brick, one that. There are many organizations that are closing down because corporate institutions are not finding these exciting things to fund. So that's a very big challenge that PUKAR has to consider and survive, because its time will come.
Well, it's true that, when Arjun Appadurai asked me, I wasn't quite expecting to join PUKAR. I knew about PUKAR because I think the kind of work that they were doing, the kind of researching that they were doing, particularly into urban areas, urban spaces, into people, lifestyles, habitations, urban habitations, and so on and so forth. And the kind of work they were doing there was very interesting. So when Arjun asked me to join PUKAR to be one of the trustees, I very happily accepted. And I think it was a good decision because I think PUKAR is doing a lot of very interesting work. And in fact, much of their work can actually serve as models for particularly related to institutions such as municipal corporations and also government organizations related to different kinds of social practices in when they get involved in, where they involve themselves in, and so on. I think it serves a very important purpose. It may not it's probably not something that you can apply immediately, but it is a body of work, it's a body of research that is eventually very, very important, I think. One of the very interesting things that PUKAR has done, I think they study in a particular slum area which was not served by the city at all, because it had no water supply, it had no drainage system, nothing at all, where people were entirely left to themselves and their own devices to carry on. And the study there was very, very revealing. I thought that kind of study nobody really was doing. And I think this is where I feel that PUKAR, occupies a very unique position.